Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In today's news hour, we shall be discussing the important articles related to economy from the Hindu newspaper. In the editorial page, there is a news about Mission Vatsalya. Mission Vatsalya is related to child protection scheme, and the editorial starts by saying that the success of any scheme depends on about how sustainable the scheme is, what are the principles it is based on, and if there is some accountability on the implementing agencies. Even though the scheme has very good intentions, but it is not sustainable in the long run, the implementation of the scheme would get hampered and it would be stopped. And if the accountability is not put on the authorities who are responsible, again the scheme would not be implemented and the very purpose of the scheme would be lost. Here the center had the intention to provide integrated benefits to children and women. So they launched various schemes, and out of that one such scheme is Mission Vatsalya. This scheme also aims to give a happy and healthy childhood to every child, along with other schemes like Mission Shakti and Poshan 2.0, which focuses on the nutrition. And various components of this scheme are setting up various statutory bodies, providing service deliveries, institutional cares, non-institutional community-based care through the support of NGOs, emergency outreach services, and training and capacity building to those people who are involved with the implementation of the scheme. So under the emergency outreach services aspect, the Mission Vatsalya had the component of child line. What is the child line? This particular number 1098, it is a 24-hour toll-free number for children in distress. So any child in distress could call to this toll-free number and express their problem, so a proper readdressal could be manned. And at the time of launching this scheme, it was decided to put this toll-free number under the administrative authority of Ministry of Home Affairs, because children could be in various problems related to law and order, and the Ministry of Home Affairs would be dealing it in a proper manner compared to any other ministry. And the police also comes under the Home Affairs Ministry. So because of the coordination, it was put under the Home Affairs Ministry. And the child line has been in operation since the last 25 years. It is based on public-private partnership where the government and the police would be receiving the call and they would be working on one end, and to readdress the problem it would be given to a particular NGO. That is why it is based on public-private partnership. But there is no proper roadmap for implementation of the scheme. That is the main challenge of the scheme, because earlier the NGO was made the nodal authority to receive the calls and readdress the problem. But now the first point of contact is through the police personnel. So when a child in distress calls to this particular toll-free number, the police people would receive the call and later on they would hand over the implementation of the issue to NGOs. But here there is a psychological problem. Children do not feel comfortable talking with police people. They are scared. They are scared to talk to someone with authority. So when the child is not comfortable about talking the issue with the police, how would be the implementation of the scheme? The very structure of the scheme is inherently flawed because of this aspect. And the other aspect being from the police side, it would just put the burden on the police. Already the Indian police, the number of police personnel required for the population is very less, and it would just be increasing the burden on the overworked police force. So there was an experiment in Chennai in 2003 when the child line was given to the all women police stations. So all the calls of the child line were diverted to all women police stations, and because of the continuous calls, the regular work of the police stations got affected, because sometimes a child, before telling its problem, it would call so many times, just cut the call, it would make a blank call, then finally when the child feels confident enough of talking, then they would open up. But the police personnel who are so busy handling the law and order issues, they may not have such a time. The NGOs would be more adapting to such situations. And in most of the cases, the problems were so general that the police intervention was not needed at all. The police intervention was needed only when there is some law and order issue, or there is some security issue, or threat to the life of the child. But in most of the cases, the child felt isolated and it needed someone just to talk to it. At that point of time, there is no need to give the police personnel overwork, and the NGOs would be more appropriate to solve such an issue. The article says that the main focus, the basis of the call is to have the proper readdressal. And if the children are not able to open up to the police people, the very fact, the very basis of the objective of the scheme is lost. So the article finally ends by saying that the government has to consider the issue from the perspective of the beneficiary. In this case, it is the child. So what is good according to the safety of the child? What would bring more happiness and security to the child, and whom would the child trust more and open up easily when telling its problem? That needs to be taken care of. And also the police is already overburdened, so they have to be reduced, and the work has to be given to the NGOs who are already doing a good job in this aspect. In the text and context page, we have a news related to HDFC. We need not go through this news. This is not important for UPSC. In the world page, US announces more sanctions on Russia. Apart from the previous sanctions like removing the Russia from the SWIFT payment systems, imposing sanctions on the Russian oil companies, stopping the Western companies from transaction business in Russia, now a new set of sanctions are being imposed on Russia, and now all the G7 members are joining the EU members in putting the sanctions. And what are the sanctions? They are the full blocking of the Russia's largest bank, that is the Sber Bank, and even the Russia's largest private sector bank, the Alpha Bank, would also be under the complete sanctions. And USA is saying that no US person, a resident entity, a company, or a citizen will be permitted to transact with these banks. And if done, all the US assets of those people would be frozen, and all the US assets of these two banks would also be frozen. And any new investment by the people of US into Russia is totally banned. Apart from this, private sanctions would be put on Putin, his family members, the foreign ministers of Russia. But there is an exemption when it comes to the sanctions. Any assistance with regarding to humanitarian activities, that would be exempted from sanctions. Here, the sanctions would only work when most of the countries who trade with Russia are putting the sanctions. Now major countries like China, Brazil, and India, who are also the major economies which are not part of the G7, if these countries don't put sanctions on Russia, we just have to wait and see how effective the sanctions would be. And the other major aspect is, even now the Europe is heavily dependent on the Russian oil. So the oil sector has been exempted under the sanctions. So it is hypocritical that on one side the Western world is putting sanctions on Russia in so many aspects, and they are exempting the Russian oil because they are purchasing the oil. So will the sanctions be really effective in the real world? We just have to be wait and see. Asian Development Bank's projects India's to grow at 7.5%. As per the forecast of the Asian Development Bank, the India's GDP will moderate to 7.5% in 2022-23, and the earlier estimate was 8.9%. Now, the major factor which was considered by the bank was the Russia-Ukraine conflict and its implication on the global economy and the Indian economy. When the budget of India was drawn, at that time the Russia-Ukraine conflict was not existing, and all our calculations was based on the average price of a barrel of oil being at $75. Now because the barrel of oil price increased almost to 130, then finally it had come to 110, so the calculations got affected. So we need revised estimates. Again, On one side there would be impact of oil prices, and on the other side too is that Russia is selling oil at discounted rate to India. So that would slightly ease the oil prices, but still the average inflation in India is expected to be around 5.8 percentage. If this is going to be true, this is less than the tolerance limit of 6% that RBI has mandated to control. So Indian economy would be doing well. But still, because of the oil prices and the increase in inflation, there would be an impact on the consumer prices, and the prices of food and retail items and all the commodities would be increased in the future. Now this year the development of economy is majorly based on the higher capital spending by the government. The higher capital spending by the government would mean that the infrastructure and logistics sectors would get improved, there would be seamless supply, and it would lead to crowding in of the private investments, and because of all this jobs would be generated in the economy. From the 1990s, India's tax to GDP ratio is about 17%. This has largely unchanged and remained at that level. So if India wants to raise new revenues, it has to look for new alternatives. Now we have been seeing news about how the GST collections have been increasing month on month, and they have been having record tax collections. But at the same time, the government has to give subsidies on oil, on cooking gas to the people. So the increased revenues there because of the GST collections would be neutralized to a large extent for the supplies that is given, and the current account deficit that is going to be increased. Another major aspect is how the state governments would mobilize the resources, because after the implementation of GST, the taxation power of state governments and their autonomy to raise revenues tremendously decreased. And if the growth has to be sustainable and inclusive, the state governments have to do well. On the one side, the state governments are not able to borrow from the market. On the other side, the fiscal deficits of the state governments have been increasing, and the debt to GDP ratio is already increasing. And even the general government debt is also increasing, and it has almost reached 90%. So we just have to wait and see, and the central government has to make sure that the state governments are easily able to borrow from the market, so that it is the state government which finally takes care of the implementation of the schemes. If the state governments are not able to raise enough revenue, there won't be inclusive and sustained growth in the economy. We can skip this news. We can skip the news related to Amazon futures. Here, the Competition Commission of India probes into the fee cartel of SBI, Axis and IDBI Bank. So whenever a corporate company wants to raise money through the issue of debentures, there is a mandatory clause in the rules that the company which is raising the debt through the issue of debentures, it has to appoint a debenture trustee. The debenture trustee would protect the interest of the investors. If the company doesn't pay the amount, the interest on the debenture, the debenture trustee would pay those to the investors. It would protect the interest of the investors, and for that the debenture trustee would collect a fees from the company. It is kind of insurance, but not exactly like insurance, and this fees is charged by the debenture trustee. In case of India, the debenture trustees have been major banks like the holding companies of banks like the SBI Capital Trustee Company, Axis Trustee and IDBI Trusteeship. Apart from charging a fees and issuing the trustee certificate, they also make an independent due diligence check on the company. They provide a report whether the company is worth investing into and whether it is safe to invest into such a company through the debentures. And apart from the debenture trustee services, these holding companies, these subunits of the banks, they were also providing various other services like the real estate services and other investment funds. And all these three, they made an association called the Trustees Association of India. And last year, The Trustees Association of India, they increased the fees tremendously for the debenture trustee. And now the Muthoot Finance Company, which wanted to propose issuing raising debt to the market, when it went to these banks, the fees was almost 300% higher, and the fees was similar in all the three banks. So it complained to the Competition Commission of India, and a probe is going on that maybe these three together have done a cartel, they have come together, collided, and they are hurting the competition by putting a proper discussed free earlier, because of which the competition would get hurt. Because when the three big firms in the market come together and they decide the market price, the smaller competitor cannot compete with them because they have colluded on the price. That is why the Competition Commission of India is currently probing the cartel. We can skip this news. Here, the important news is that under the IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav, a new committee is going to be coming on the improving the chip sector. We can skip the news related to refineries. These are the articles related to economy today. Thank you so much.